Great. In the interest of time, I'm going to get us underway now. Thank you again so much, everybody, for joining this session around the Schools 2030 Item Bank and our very first public launch of this exciting resource. Can you flip to the next slide, please? Thank you so much. My name is Dr. Bronwyn McGrath. I work for Aga Khan Foundation, and with AKF, I lead the Schools 2030 program, who is a big part of the story behind the creation of this item bank. So I'm going to start with a very brief introduction into Schools 2030 as a program and the role of assessment within it. And then I'm going to turn over to some of our partners to launch the item bank and give you a bit of a walkthrough into this resource. We're going to then leave time for some reflections from some of our partners and colleagues. And then we want to leave about 20 minutes at the end for Q&A. We do have a Q&A function open, so please do feel free at any time to pop questions into that, and then we'll make sure that those are answered in those final 20 minutes. Next slide, please. Thank you. So first of all, very briefly, what is Schools 2030? Next slide, please. Schools 2030 is a global program, and we are a program focused on holistic learning and teacher leadership. And when I refer to holistic learning here, I'm talking about the whole range of knowledge, skills, attitudes, and values that young people need to thrive. And the heart of the Schools 2030 program is a focus on teacher agency and teacher-led design, as we believe and we recognize educators as leaders, innovators, and active agents in education reform. Next slide. This is the footprint of the program. We work across 10 countries, from Brazil to Portugal, through East Africa, Central Asia, and South Asia as well. Next slide, please. And the program rests on a 3-step model of human-centered design that supports teachers to design contextualized innovations to meet the learning needs of their classroom. So the first step of this model is assessment, where teachers use both learning outcome and classroom environment assessment tools to understand the needs in their classroom. Step 2 is innovate, where through human-centered design, they design, test, and implement new pedagogical practices and innovations. And step 3 is showcase, where they gather evidence of the impact these innovations are having and share this more widely to inform and transform the education systems around them. Next slide. So what is the role then of assessment in Schools 2030? And I'll just add, there's much more we can say about all the other steps and aspects of the Schools 2030 program. Please do go to the website, schools2030.org, to learn more about the program and also to learn about some of the specific innovations teachers have created using this 3-step model. But today, of course, our focus is on assessment. So I'm going to dive in and spend just a moment talking a little bit about the role of assessment in the Schools 2030 program. Next slide, please. Thank you. So the primary purpose of assessment in Schools 2030 is to support teachers to make evidence-informed decisions, to support their human-centered design and innovation work with evidence on learning outcomes and the learning environment. Next slide, please. So I mentioned previously, assessment is the first step of the 3-step model in Schools 2030, but actually assessment underpins all steps. So at the beginning, teachers use assessments to understand what student learning needs are and how they can address those. Through step 2 in human-centered design, they use assessment tools as part of an ongoing iteration process. And then in step 3, assessments are used to gather evidence of the impact innovations are having that can then be showcased and shared more widely. Next slide, please. So before now we turn into learning about some of the assessment tools and items teachers have used in Schools 2030, I just wanted to make 3 quick overall points around assessment in Schools 2030. The first is, as I mentioned, these assessment tools and approaches are holistic in nature. That is, they look at a whole range of knowledge, skills, attitudes, and values. So this graphic captures the different skills that are assessed for different age groups across all 10 countries. And as you can quickly, I hope, see, not a single country or age group is assessing the same things. Literacy and numeracy are common across all contexts as priorities, but other areas include creativity, relationship building, entrepreneurship, empathy, communication skills, etc. So we have a very broad definition of foundational learning, and these are aligned to priorities in each country and for each age group. And that gets to my second point. Next slide, please, which is the importance of context for assessment in Schools 2030. So over the past 5 years, we have worked with national assessment partners, as well as teachers, school leaders, and government in each program country to develop contextualized measurement schools that align to those country-specific domains, as well as national curricular and policy contexts. And then my final slide and my final point is that we also understand the very great importance of balancing between contextualization and a sort of universality of understanding on relevance and quality and rigor. And this is a question that often comes up when we're talking about holistic learning assessment and contextualized assessment is there a balance between contextual relevance and overall quality and rigor. And for Schools 2030, we don't believe that those two ideas are in conflict. And we have an approach rooted in partnership that we really believe helps bring the expertise of our local partners as well as of global partners together to help us create assessment tools and items that are both contextually valid and globally valid. And so I'm going to turn over to one of those assessment partners now from Oxford Measured, who can share a little bit more about the item bank that we're looking at today. So over to you, Oxford Measured.
Thanks so much, Bronwyn. So my name's Rachel Arthur, I'm the Managing Director of Oxford Measured, and we've had the privilege of working with Schools 2030 and assessment partners for the last 4.5 years. And we've had a fantastic time being able to play the role of facilitating across the national assessment partners to facilitate their conversations, to support them in developing tools. So since 2020, there have been vast improvements in holistic learning outcome measurement across the sector and around the world. And this has really been driven by catalytic funding, increased advocacy, and also an enabling environment that has encouraged more assessment actors to try innovative approaches and find solutions to measuring holistic learning outcomes. The assessment workstream in Schools 2030 is one of those initiatives. We work through partnership to ensure that the assessments are, as Bronwyn just said, contextually driven, fit for purpose, and useful and usable by teachers. As part of the work, the aim has always been to develop platforms, guidance materials, and other global public goods that will allow others to also measure holistic learning outcomes in a cost-effective way. The item bank was developed as part of Schools 2030's assessment work. Next slide, please. It was first used internally so that national assessment partners across 9 countries could search and review other partners' assessment items. It's been stored on been stored on an internal Schools 2030 assessment hub, which Oxford Measured established to support item and tool development, communication and lesson learning across national assessment partners, and that peer-to-peer learning and support. So the item bank allows for the sharing of country-developed assessment tools, items, and other questions that can be searched by language, subject, grade level, and other characteristics that we'll go into more detail in a moment about. It provides information on item difficulty and item performance within the overall assessment. Next slide, please. The items in the item bank were designed originally, as Bronwyn has stated, within Schools 2030's purpose of classroom assessment by and for teachers. However, there is potential use, its potential use is much broader. The item bank can be used to support research or for summative sample-based assessments if they're reviewed and adapted appropriately. And on the landing page, we provide some information about how to appropriately use the items in the item bank and adjust them for different purposes across contexts. The item bank is useful to you if you are perhaps responsible for developing holistic learning outcome measures, perhaps within a government assessment unit, as a researcher, or perhaps as a MEL officer, and anyone looking to work with teachers on assessing what their learners know and can do across many holistic domains. It will be most useful for you if you're familiar with the key concepts in assessment, like the need for scope and balance across your domain when you're developing tools. Key concepts like item difficulty, item discrimination, and test reliability, and the ability to interpret psychometric output to inform test development and adaptation. Next slide, please. In 2026, the Schools 2030 team are also packaging up a lot of the resources that we've been developing across the 5 years of Schools 2030. So keep your eyes out for handbooks and other guidance that will help provide you with information about these key concepts that will help you be able to use the item bank more effectively, and that will help make the item bank more usable for more people. With all of that said, the item bank is a tool to support those working on assessment. We, being the assessment partners across the whole Schools 2030 partnership, are thrilled to be able to share it with you, and we hope that it will be useful to you. I'll now hand over to Sarah, who has predominantly been responsible for bringing this item bank to life and building it, and she's going to take us through what it looks like and what you can expect to find when you go digging around in the item bank.
Thank you, Rachel. Sorry, I was trying to find my screen. So here on the screen, you will be able to see the item bank that we have developed. As Rachel mentioned, when you come to the landing page, you will have information on what the item bank is, what is its purpose, what information it contains, and how you can use it, and all the things to keep in mind when you are using the item bank. To be able to see the items, we will navigate to the item search page. On this page, you have the ability to search for the items. If you simply click on search, it will give you a list of all the items that are in the item bank, and you will see for each item an item ID, the text of the item, the scoring, and the country it is from, and its different uses. But if you want to narrow down your search results, we have these filtering options on the top. You can use a keyword search. So for instance, you're looking for items from Tanzania. You could just enter that and press search, and it would give you items from Tanzania. But you could also use other ways to narrow down your search results. You could use the item ID. It's set to default at is any, so any item ID would show up. But if you know an item ID, like you, for example, previously looked at an item ID and you want to look at that again, you can just enter that item ID and that would show up. Other ways to filter are using the filter for the item text. So you can over here choose, for example, it contains, and for example, you're interested in items on edition, and you type that in and search. It will bring up all items that are related to edition, for example. You can also leave that empty, say is any, and it will show you all items. But you can also filter by grade. So you can choose is, and we have 3 options over here. We have pre-primary, primary, and secondary. And these are the 3 cohorts at which the Schools 2030 program is targeted. So the pre-primary is for the 5+ age group, primary is for the 10+ age group, and secondary is for the 15+ age group. So for now, I'll select secondary. But you can also use these other options. So you can say is not secondary, and it would show you any items that are not secondary. And then you can also say it's blank or it is not blank. These are some options. All of these options I will show you in a minute how you can remind yourself what these options mean. But for now, like I said, I'll choose is secondary. Then you can also filter by the construct or the domain that you're interested in. So we have around 25 constructs in the item bank at the moment. So we have some academic domains such as literacy and mathematics and numeracy, but we also have social emotional learning domains such as creativity, communication, etc. So we will for now select literacy. And then finally, you can choose what country you want to look at items from and filter by that. So when you click on search, it will just filter down by all of those options that you've selected, and it will give you a list of the items that are relevant. And you can look at several different search results that show up over here. I will just show you an example of an item and what that looks like. So if you click on view, it will take you to information about detailed information about the item. And on this page, you will see on the left-hand side, you have the item image. So how the item looked when it was first being assessed or presented to the students. You will also have the same item in text. We hope that this would be useful for anyone who doesn't have access to images or are working in a low bandwidth area and can access only text. So we have text available over here. And then similarly, we have the scoring. So we have an image for how the item can be scored, but also a text indicator of how the item can be scored. In addition to the item itself, we also have the psychometric properties of the item. And you will notice that in the middle column over here. So the first thing that you see over here are the item characteristic curves. And you'll notice that we have several for each item, and that's because this item has been used at several different time points. And so we've labeled each of the item characteristic curve with the use that where that property showed up. So the first one that you see is the item characteristic curve, and I am going to hand over to Rachel to explain what the item characteristic curve shows.
Thanks, Sarah. So this is again psychometric output, and just to try and explain it so that you can kind of see what you're looking at here for those who aren't familiar with the ICCs. The ICC shows the probability of a learner answering an item correctly based on their overall ability. So what we would want to see when we look at an item is that as learners, all of the learners who are in the assessment, as their overall scores go up, so their scores on the whole assessment, we would want to see that the probability of them answering each item also goes up. So it helps us visualize how the item's functioning across the ability spectrum. So a well-performing item will typically have a smooth, increasing curve, which you can see here, indicating that learners with higher ability levels have a higher probability of answering the item correctly. So if you think, for example, if looking at the learners across the assessment, if learners that have a lower overall proficiency level have a higher chance of answering the item correctly than those who have have a higher level of overall proficiency, something's going wrong with the item. So this output is like an indicator to say there's something wrong with your item. You need to go back and look at it. But as we can see from this item here, the item characteristic curves are giving that smooth increasing curve that indicates that as learners with higher ability levels have a higher probability of answering this item correctly.
Thank you, Rachel. Then in addition to the item characteristic curve, we also have the item person map. And in the same way as the item characteristic curves, we have 3 different time points at which this was available because this item was used at 3 different time points. So over to you, Rachel, again, for what the item person map is.
Thanks, Sarah. So the item person map what we can see here is it shows us a couple of things on the item person map. So the first thing is that it shows us the difficulty level of the item. So the item that is in the orange box is the item that you're looking at in the item bank. And as you can see in that top item person map, this is an item that is kind of medium to low level of difficulty in comparison to the items around it. So it tells you something about how difficult the item is. It's of course relative. So if you put the same item with a bunch of much more difficult items, it would fall down in that kind of ranking order of items. What you can also see on the left-hand side of the item person map is the distribution of learners. So what we can see, what we can say from this item, pretty much as we look across these 3 item person maps, is that the ability level of the learners is fairly suited to the range of the difficulty of the items, perhaps with the exception of those items that are coming very high up at the top. So there's a one with a line. They're too difficult, but with the exception of those, most of the items are performing within the right levels of proficiency for the test takers. And of course, it's always relative to the test takers. If you took exactly the same tool and exactly the same items to a group of test takers with lower proficiency levels, it would perform differently. So all of this psychometric output is about the combination of the learners who took the assessment and the assessment that they took.
Thank you. And then finally, we also have the discrimination score of the items right at the bottom, once again, for the 3 different time points. Rachel.
Thanks, Sarah. So what we can see there is that the discrimination was at 0.36, then 0.27, and then 0.48 in Tanzania. So to tell you what that kind of means, this measures how well the item differentiates between high and low performing learners. We kind of have different reference points for different types of assessments. So it's fairly well established that over 0.5 is quite good for academic assessments, but then we kind of lower that threshold for some other types of holistic learning outcome measurements where there's less of an evidence base on what the thresholds are agreed within kind of the community of practitioners and assessment experts. What it does is it tells us, items with higher discrimination values are more effective at distinguishing between learners of different ability levels. Usually our discrimination appears in a format of between 0 and 1. Anything over 0.5 is very good. But also there might be situations where you want to include an item in your assessment that has a lower level of item discrimination. And you can see here that this is below 0.5, although the last N line is almost getting to 0.5. And that's because, as is the case in this item, there are areas of core knowledge that learners need to know. And so if it's reflected in the curriculum, it needs to be part of the assessment. But it might well be that most learners are familiar with it because they need to be. And so therefore the discrimination score will be lower. So interpreting these is always a case of thinking through what purpose your item is trying to serve within the assessment, then thinking whether that discrimination score helps. If you're actually looking for a very difficult item that tests kind of the higher levels of the curriculum, then you would want a higher discrimination score. If you're testing kind of core component that you expect that a lot of learners are going to know the answer, then you can relax your threshold.
Thank you, Rachel. And then finally, on the right-hand side in the column, you see the country and the different assessment points where this assessment item was used. And in addition to that, you have the overall reliability score for the entire assessment of which this item was a part. And once again, Rachel, final call on you to explain what that would mean.
Thanks, Sarah. So the reliability is really about how reliably the items kind of hang together as an overall assessment. Usually our reliability thresholds and what we would expect to see differ depending on the use case of the assessment. Where it's high stakes, so it's like a university examination, we probably want to see that over zero point 0.8. Where it's lower stakes and it's about kind of understanding the learning levels, or where it's population based and perhaps for research, that threshold can be relaxed down, sometimes even some argue to 0.6. But we can see here that we have really good reliability levels. Another note on reliability is everything is always a balance in assessment. It's always about what you're trying to achieve. It's not necessarily a good thing to have an extremely high reliability level. What that might mean is that you're just testing the same thing over and over and over again. You do want to have that scope and that balance of what it is that you're assessing across the domain. And when you do that, your reliability levels will go down a bit. So you want to achieve the threshold that's right for your use case. It's not necessarily the higher the better.
Thank you, Rachel. So that's the kind of information that you see for each item. Like I said, in the assessment, in the item bank, we have items for both academic measures and for social emotional learning. And so I'm just going to give you an example of what a social emotional learning item might look like. So over here, I'm going to pick one for critical thinking. And once again, a few items over there, but if you just click on view, it will show you the different types of items that you have available for social emotional learning and the same type of information that you will have over here. Now, I know some of you might not be interested in the psychometric information. And so if you're just interested in the item information, the item itself and the scoring, then you can go to the item list tab on this item bank. On the item bank itself, once again, as you click on this, you see the list of all items that are there in this item bank. But as with the item search, you can add filters over here to narrow down the items that you see. So for instance, if I do countries of Afghanistan, and then, sorry, once again, you have similar options to choose from over here: country, grade, construct, item. So I'm going to just show you one where from Afghanistan, and this is what it looks like. The reason why I've pulled up this particular item is because you will notice that some of these items in the item bank are not just in English. There are items in different languages as well, although these are limited at the moment. But as you have heard, this is going to be a live resource, a live database. So we will continue updating this, and we hope to add more items on here from different languages. The example you see over here is in Dari, but then you will see some in Russian or Kyrgyz, and you would see some in Portuguese, I think. And in addition to all of this, if all of this was a lot of information for you all to take in and you're not sure what each of these ways, how to use the item bank, we have a tab over here with instructions and a whole walkthrough of how you can use this item bank for different reasons, for different purposes, and how you can use the filter options to help you navigate the resource efficiently. That is all from me. I will hand over to Bronwyn.
Thank you so much, Sarah. What a fantastic walkthrough. And even though I've been part of the development of these items and assessment tools from a distance, every time I speak to you and hear more, I feel like I learn more, and I'm amazed again about the detail of every item and the psychometric properties and the incredible amount of thought and partnership that has gone into every single one of these more than 1,500 items that are up here. So a huge thanks to our partners at Oxford Measured for sharing this amazing resource with the world. I'd like now to turn and just have some reflections from some of the wider partners and colleagues involved in the item bank work. And first, I'm going to turn to my very dear colleague Ramat from Aga Khan Foundation Afghanistan, who's going to just share some reflections on the potential that the item bank has in his context, and also why the holistic assessment and the development of these contextualized tools was important for him and for his team. So over to you, Ramat.
Hello everyone. Thank you so much, Bronwyn. I'm Rahmat Safi. I work as a knowledge management manager for Aga Khan Foundation in Afghanistan, and I support the assessment, learning, and evaluation functions of the education programs, including Schools 2030. So before going to the item bank, let me give you a little bit background of Afghanistan, about the Afghanistan assessment system overall and the gap that we have. So in Afghanistan, unfortunately, we don't have any national level assessment framework that could guide the work of assessment. And the only assessment that we have so far is the school examinations, which I'm sure are not that reliable and psychometrically tested to give us data about the students' holistic development and learning outcomes. If we look at the Afghanistan score and the LASI index, that is the Learning Assessment Capacity Index. So Afghanistan unfortunately scores 0 or 1 out of 5 scores, which means that there is a complete lack of assessment systems and there is a biggest gap in this area. So Schools 2030, particularly the launch of this item bank, I think it offers a very cost-effective solution to the issue that we are currently facing, and it bridged the gaps that we are having. Simply, so we have had assessments like once maybe in 10 years, and then that stopped. But this Schools 2030 assessment is something that is continuous, and we can measure and we can understand the student progress over time. So in simple terms, the Schools 2030 Item Bank, it turns assessment from one-time event to a kind of a continuous uh, and practical tools for improving teaching and learning in the schools. So the item bank in Afghanistan, it will be very helpful for our teachers, evaluators, independent researchers, and research firms as they are facing significant problems and issues while trying to assess the learning outcomes of students in the schools. So, as a researcher and evaluator, I myself faced many times. So, there are tight deadlines for evaluations and research, and we are not able to develop such tools which are like psychometrically validated and tested. So, this is a very cost-effective solution for both the teachers, for researchers, and also for the students in the higher education sector. So again, from my personal experience, I faced a lot of problem while I was student, and I was trying to measure the learning outcomes. So I was kind of confused at what to do. But having these items, which are highly contextualized in the Afghanistan context, and it is based on the curriculum. So now when maybe a teacher or a student or an evaluator, they can easily access and use it as this is available publicly. And in addition to that, so as I highlighted in the beginning, that the traditional exams that we have that focuses narrowly on the memorization and testing the memory of the students. And at the end of an academic year or at the end of a course, so the questions that is asked by the parents or by the stakeholders in the education, they are asking that did the students pass, and that's it. But with this Schools 2030 item bank and these assessment tools, so we are shifting from that question that is only focusing on passing or failing the students. So we are shifting to like, are the students developing their skills that they need to learn, adapt, and to succeed in their life? So in conclusion, Schools 2030, this item bank is bridging the gap that exists in Afghanistan assessment systems. It provides the tools and which are highly contextualized and which are very simple in comparison to others, and which can be easily understood by the ones who are implementing or administrating these assessments, because they are in the local language, and all the examples and the test items are from the school books, from the textbooks, and also the other questions with regard to the non-academic skills, for example, communication or leadership. They are from the Afghanistan context. If we look at the examples, for example, about the culture, the questions or the item about culture, so that is that speaks about, or that asks questions about like one of the most important cultural sites in Afghanistan, the Buddha statues in Bamiyan. So they are very simple and very contextualized, and it would be very much helpful for the teachers and for the educators, particularly our teacher educators who are working with the teachers directly on administrating these assessments and working on the schools. So thank you very much. Over to you, Branway.
Thank you so much, Ramat, not only for your reflections, but also for the important role you've played in designing a lot of these assessment tools and testing them and validating them in the context of Afghanistan. I'd like to turn now to a very important partner of ours, Porticus. We have Emma from Porticus joining, and Porticus has been a partner of Aga Khan Foundation in the Schools 2030 program right from the beginning, when the program first launched in 2020, and has always supported our assessment work stream. And so, Emma, I'd really love if you could give some reflections on the evolution of our work and assessment and how you see this in the broader ecosystem of social emotional learning assessment, where Porticus plays such an important role.
Great. Yes, thanks, Bronwyn. Happy to be here. Good afternoon, good morning, good evening to everyone around the world. As Bronwyn said, I'm Emma van der Meulen. I work for the Porticus Foundation. So for those who don't know Porticus, we are a philanthropic organization that aims to create a just and sustainable future where human dignity flourishes. And our work in education focuses on ensuring that all children, but especially those in extreme adversity, receive inclusive, high-quality education, helping them to reach their full potential. We focus in particular on social-emotional learning and a holistic approach to education, because we know from experience and from evidence that this is key to learning and thriving, especially for children on the margins. So we therefore partner with initiatives such as Schools 2030 that champion this commitment to holistic learning. And I'm also proud to have been involved in this partnership for the past 5 years. I want to start with congratulating really Rachel and her team at Oxford Measured, and Bronwyn and the entire Schools 2030 team and all partners in the 10 countries involved in the assessment workstream on the launch of this item bank. I think it's a great achievement. And last week at a session, someone told me that measuring holistic learning is a marathon compared to measuring literacy and numeracy. It can be done as a sprint, thanks to the availability of the wider availability of standardized tools. So today, we are actually witnessing the finish line of a 10-country marathon on tool development for holistic learning. But indeed, as Bronwyn said, a bit of reflection, maybe a question to consider, could that have been a sprint instead of a marathon? So 5 years ago, we made a deliberate decision to do things differently, to not use one standardized global tool for measuring items such as problem solving or empathy, because these concepts, as has been shown also in the webinar today, require local interpretation and contextualized assessment tools in order to be meaningful. And over the past 5 years, all assessment partners at all levels have worked very hard together with teachers to identify, first of all, the most relevant concepts to measure in that context, and then to develop and test the tools. And this may now seem like a very technical item bank, but this has not been developed in isolation by technical experts. I think teacher agency has been really central to how these items have been developed and tested. And for those of you more familiar with Schools 2030, I think you will know that it's really a collective effort to make teachers' voices heard. And teachers' voices are also now speaking to us through this item bank. So I'm also extending congratulations to all the teachers who put in their time and insights into developing these items. And at Porticus, we often hear from our partners how difficult it is to measure concepts such as problem solving or empathy. But at the same time, and I think as Rachel also mentioned, we also see that the field of holistic learning outcomes assessment has really developed over the past years. And I think this reflects a growing recognition of the importance of assessing education beyond literacy and numeracy, and also the importance of a range of other skills to help children thrive in today's world. And what gets measured gets treasured. So the more we know about how to measure these skills, the more they will also receive recognition and become embedded in education policy and practice. So I think making this item bank publicly available is a huge contribution to this field. We would encourage everyone that tuned in today to explore what's here and how it can be of use to your work. So if you're about to start your own marathon on holistic learning outcomes assessment, you may be able to do it faster as a result of having these items available. So thank you very much. Congratulations again, and back to you, Bronwyn.
Thank you so much, Emma, and thank you so much to you and the whole Porticus team for your ongoing support and emotional knowledge support and all the other forms of support that you've provided this work over the last 5+ years. And for a final round of reflections, I'd like to turn to our partners at Education Cannot Wait and Marit Spolder, who's joining us from ECW, who's also been a partner of Schools 2030 and has particularly supported the assessment in conflict and fragile states, particularly in Uganda, Afghanistan, and Pakistan. So Moritz, over to you for some reflections.
Yes, Bronwyn. Hi, good morning, afternoon, evening, wherever you are. I'm Marit Spolder. I'm the monitoring manager at Education Cannot Wait, which is a global fund for education in emergencies. So we advocate and mobilize money to make sure that children who are affected by conflict or crisis still receive the quality education that they deserve, like everyone else. And also from my side, a big thanks to Bronwyn, to Rahmat, to Rachel, Sarah, Paulina, and everyone else who worked on this item bank. I think it's a major achievement and a very job well done. I think ECW's collaboration with and funding to the Schools 2030 initiative is anchored in the firm belief that children must develop holistically, and that academic and socio-emotional development go together. We cannot really talk about foundational literacy and numeracy on one side and then socio-emotional skills on the other side. They go together. And we also have a shared belief on the importance of equity and inclusion. And this is particularly important for children who are affected by conflict and crisis. We cannot only measure foundational literacy and numeracy or only look at aspects of social-emotional learning. They go together, and they go together for every child. Now, in my role at ECW, I am in touch. We fund a lot of programs, shorter and longer. And whenever I interact with the countries and the partners that we fund, one of the first questions they always ask me is, what tool should we use? Right? And I always encourage my colleagues to say and take a step back and ask a different type of question, right? Of what do you actually want kids to learn? And which items actually measure that, what they need to learn? And then how we will use that information to drive better decisions, whether it is in education policy or better programming or budget allocations towards interventions within it. Because when we start with those kind of essentially the purpose question of assessment also becomes more to life. It becomes more meaningful, and it becomes a kind of driver of change and evidence-based decision making, and not just a technical must-do exercise because of donors want it for their accountability. And that's, I think, why the Schools 2030 initiative and this item bank specifically is so exciting. Bringing together over 1,500 validated items across 25 constructs on literacy, numeracy, and a wide range of social-emotional learning skills, not only on primary, but also on pre-primary, secondary levels, is a huge accomplishment. And in my understanding, also one of the first, especially for this diverse set of countries that we work in. And moreover, done through a kind of a bottom-up approach that Emma also referred to, with meaningful inclusion of teachers and schools. And I think when assessments are designed and used well, it gives us more valid and reliable items basically lead to more useful information, right? And that useful information leads to better informed decision making when developing or improving programmatic approaches, education policies, plans, and budgets. So, and this is essential basically to advance quality education for all. With the whole humanitarian development sector facing difficult times, I think we need to become more efficient and we need to become more effective in the way we work. And I think this item bank is a great addition to all of us. Thanks, Bronwyn.
Thank you so much, Moritz. Thank you so much, Moritz, and thanks to ECW again for all of the support that you've provided, and particularly in some of the toughest contexts in which we work. We're so grateful to have your partnership to really address the learning needs of students and teachers in these really challenging contexts. So I'd like now to open up for Q&A. If you have a question, there is a Q&A function at the bottom of your screen. So you can click that and you can enter a question. We already have a few up there, so I'm going to start us out with a few of those. So the very first question, actually I can answer, so I'll take that one. And then most of the other ones I think are for our experts in the room. So Sohi-Wan asks if all of the items in the bank are psychometrically validated. And yes, they are, because that is a precursor of them going on to the item bank. So we've developed many, many items, and as they get their validation and meet all of the different credentials that Oxford Measured spoke through, then we consider them ready to go up on the item bank. Not too dissimilar, we've got a question from Horeen Kanoti, and apologies if I mispronounce your name. Horeen asks, for a construct like critical thinking, how is the scoring done, especially grade-wise? Do you already have determined learning progressions grade-wise? So just a question around the scoring. And she has a sort of linked question around whether any of the assessments are scenario-based for SEL constructs. And I know actually several of ours are scenario-based. I know, for example, our SEL tools from Portugal were scenario-based. But over to Rachel and Sarah to answer perhaps any more detail around scenario-based assessment and also around the scoring for some constructs, for example, critical thinking.
I will actually pass over to Polena, who worked most closely with our national assessment partners as they developed their items and tools, and so is closest to the kind of suite of assessment tools across the item bank. So Polena, could you comment on these, please?
Sorry about that. Yes, of course. So several of our items, as Bronwyn mentioned, are scenario-based. Whether they are or not depends on the conditions for testing that a country wants to implement. So for example, in countries where literacy is low and there are enough resources to do one-on-one assessment, oral assessment, we use a lot of scenario-based because that allows for way more flexibility in the type of responses that we would score as correct or incorrect or partial scoring. Whereas in other countries where literacy levels are higher or there might be less resources for that type of assessment, we might use multiple choice questions, or we might use written responses. So the type of item largely depends on the context, but of course, many of them are scenario based. And for scoring, I think as much of the work we do, it's kind of an iterative process. So we might first theoretically decide along with the national assessment partners what would be like the developmental scale of a particular skill. So for example, in critical thinking, we might say that the subdomain we want to measure is whether someone can distinguish a cause from a consequence, and that would be a score of 1. But then we might decide that a score of 2 would be to be able to predict a consequence, and a score of 3 would be able to predict and explain a consequence. So we established like that theoretical scoring first, but then through the psychometric analysis, we see if that scoring holds. So we might see that actually predicting a consequence and explaining it is the exact same level. So we would merge that into 1 and 2 instead of 1, 2, 3. And that might sound more complex than it is, because I think that teachers very intuitively know how to do the scoring. But if you want to know like the nitty gritty of what goes behind that, that's basically how it works.
Thanks so much, Paulina, and I hope that answers our friend's question well. We have a couple of questions that have come in that relate actually a little bit to the first point around the psychometric validation. And the questions are all around what type of inclusion criteria are there for items to be going on the item bank? For example, is there a threshold level that you would want to see before we would put them on the item bank? Or are there other criteria that are at play before you'll put an item on the item bank?
Yeah, I'm happy to answer that one. So I think we outline in our reports, which perhaps some of this on the methodology will be able to be shared in 2026 as well, what the thresholds across the different kind of tests that we do on the tests are. So what our reliability criteria is, what our item discrimination criteria is, etc. We don't have hard and fast rules because, as I said earlier, it's about the use case, and it's about balancing these things rather than having hard and fast rules. So as I use the example of the item discrimination, we don't want to throw out an item just because it has a low discrimination, because there might be a reason, it might serve a purpose for that item to have a low discrimination. We do come from the perspective of the tool meeting a certain threshold rather than the individual items all having to meet exact thresholds. And that's exactly for that reason of what I just said with the item discrimination. It's about the role that the item plays in the overall tool. So essentially we have thresholds for like the proportion of items that need to have a discrimination of a certain level within the tool. Then the tool is included in the item bank. So that's why we've included item level data, so that you can judge the item in and of itself, but also keep in mind that all of those statistics about items are relative to the other items and are relative to the learners who sat that assessment. So as I've said in the chat, if you change the item use, if you change the learners that you're administering the item to, if you change the other items that you're administering with that item, you will not get the same psychometric output. So that's why it's really important to consider balancing these different kind of criteria, balancing the different psychometric output. And as always, we never take the psychometric data as the be all and end all. What really we want to focus on is that, first of all, that our tool is reflecting the scope and the balance of the domain that we're trying to measure, and then that those items are working well individually and together against that measurement aim.
Thank you so much, Rachel. We've got another great question that's come in from Rosemary Aiolo around the participation of officials from within the government or other national assessment bodies in terms of developing the item bank. So, Rosemary, one thing I can share on that is in each one of the Schools 2030 countries, we have worked always in partnership with the relevant authorities, whether within the ministry or at a local or state level, who are responsible for the assessment. So for example, in Kyrgyzstan and Tajikistan, we work in very close partnership with the national testing centers. They play a very big role in our assessment partnerships in each country. In other countries, it might be at a district level or at a more local level. Those partners were always involved in selecting the domains on which we focused, and we're also involved at different stages in reviewing tools, supporting tools, also on training teachers in the tools. Often we're working through government teacher training modalities to train on the assessment tools. So we've had a very close relationship with government authorities across all our contexts. It looks a bit different in each country. So the best people to answer those questions are the national assessment partners and the national coordinators in each country who can give you details about the extent to which and who in particular from government and different national testing authorities were involved in the development of these different items and tools and indeed even the domains on which they focus. In terms of the item bank, I think it's a very, very good question. And I don't know if anybody from Oxford Measured can add on to that. I think the item bank, actually, we have really sort of pooled everything across the countries and developed it globally. But I think our national partnerships will be very important in the dissemination and the mobilization of the item banks. I don't know, Oxford Measured, if you have anything additional you'd like to reflect on there in terms of the partnership with the national level.
Perhaps it would be useful just for us to give a little bit of a summary of the approach that we've used across the different countries. So as Bronwyn said, with Schools 2030, and as Emma said, we decided to try something different to innovate. And as Bronwyn said, we see not that credibility and rigor has to be balanced with contextual relevance, but actually you achieve credibility and rigor through contextual relevance. And for that reason, that's why we work with national assessment partners across the Schools 2030 countries. Our kind of base way of doing that, or average way, I guess, or the kind of starting point, is that we provide guidance tools to the national assessment partners, which I referred to earlier. They're able to use those guidance materials if they need to be able to select in collaboration with other stakeholders the domains that are most relevant, most valued, most needed in each particular context. Then they're able to use the guidance materials to develop kind of the first assessment framework and the first tools, and then Oxford Measured provides some review of that, looking and saying, well, you might want to look at this area or that area, is this item capturing what you're intending it to capture? And we do a kind of face validity review and provide some comments, and then the national assessment partners are in the driving seat about which of those comments they think are useful and they want to act on, and which comments they might say, thanks for your support and your feedback, but we'd like to keep it how it is. Then there was a pilot in each country. So with a smaller number of students, but across not statistically representative, but across a number of schools that kind of represent the types of schools in that setting. And we analysed the data using psychometric analysis, and then again provided a report to each of the national assessment partners to say, like, these items are doing well, these items maybe aren't doing so well, you might want to go back and look at them. This tool is targeting the proficiency levels of the students really well. This one's not so much, you might want to add some harder items or some easier items. And then national assessment partners, again, make decisions about what they want to act on and what they don't want to act on. And then when the tools are finalized, then they're actually used in the program. That's why you'll see within the item bank, it will have like pilot and then baseline, end line. So that refers to the first pilot. There might have been some changes. If the item was changed, it might appear as a different item with a different ID. And that's kind of the process of how we went about developing the tool. So it was very much led by the national assessment partners with technical support provided by Oxford Measured.
Thank you so much, Rachel. And I'm afraid we're running out of time, and we still have a few great questions in the chat. So I'd like to encourage those who had questions they didn't get answered, please do reach out to us. We'll always be willing as well to perhaps revisit and have a follow-up webinar in 6 months' time to see how the development of the item bank has gone and to answer more questions there, because this is an ongoing conversation, and we're very happy to have you all as part of that conversation and part of that movement. We do have a very quick poll. We'd like to hear from all of you about how you think the item bank may support your work. So we're going to open that poll now. It should appear on your screens. And just take a moment before you dial off to take a look through and think how you might use the item bank in your professional work over the next 12 months. This will really help us to think how we continue to adapt it for the use of the wider education sector, what aspects could be strengthened, what aspects are most useful that perhaps need a little bit of additional work. So please do take a moment to fill that out. And as you're doing so, I'd like to just take a moment to really deeply thank all of the partners that have been involved in the work of the Schools 2030 Assessment Item Bank. As we've said, this represents now over 5 years of work on identifying focal domains, developing, testing, piloting, iterating, a really dense and rich network of partners from country to global level. And I'd like to thank everybody so much for the collective work that's gone into this resource. And now we're so excited to launch it globally and to allow all of you to make it something that's useful to you. And as many people have noted in the chat, this is a resource that's open. It's available to others to use, and we're very happy to have you reach out to us if you have any questions, if you'd like to discuss anything more, and to really have this as the start of a big global conversation around the importance of holistic learning assessment and contextualized valid assessment items. So thank you again to all of our speakers, and thank you to all of the participants for your great questions and your engagement. And we look forward to seeing you soon. All of the resources will be shared out on our different social media channels and listservs, so you'll have access to a recording of this session, as well as the PowerPoint and links to all of the resources mentioned. Thanks again, everybody, and have a wonderful rest of your day or evening.